This section is looking at identifying dominant strategies for two companies in order to identify whether there's a Nash equilibrium or not. And so what we want to look at to identify a dominant strategy is whether or not a single best option exists for a player regardless of what the other player chooses to do. So in this example, if Coke chooses to advertise, then the best thing for Pepsi in this case would be to also advertise because 80 is better than 45. And if Coke chooses not to advertise, Pepsi's best option is also to advertise because here 120 is better than 100. So the payouts for Pepsi are always better if it chooses to advertise regardless of what Coke chooses to do. And then same thing applies for Coke. If Pepsi chooses to advertise, then Coke's best option is to advertise because 80 is better than 45. And if Pepsi chooses not to advertise, then Coke should go ahead and advertise anyway because 120 is better than 100. So no matter what Pepsi chooses to do, Coke gets a better payout when it chooses to advertise. So given that, then the dominant strategy of both is to advertise, and we would have a Nash equilibrium at this quadrant where they would both advertise and earning 80 per round. Would it be better for them to not advertise and get 100? The answer is yes, but this is a Nash equilibrium. There's no reason for them to change their behavior because if Coke chooses not to advertise, then Pepsi will just choose to continue to do what it's doing because it benefits. It goes from 80 to 120. So there's no sense in Pepsi also failing to advertise because 120 would be better than this quadrant where they were both behaving in the same way. So there's no reason for either side to change. But how can they get here? Because this quadrant is clearly better than getting 80 per turn. And the answer to that is if both players play a game called tit for tat, then they can actually get to what's known as the cooperative outcome, where profits are maximized for the industry. And by tit for tat, what we mean is if Coke chooses to not advertise and Pepsi chooses to take advantage of that and advertise anyway, in the first round, they'll get 120 payout. But then from there on out, Coke will choose to punish Pepsi by also advertising, driving Pepsi's profits down back to 80. So in the long term, Coke and Pepsi will actually be will not be able to maximize their profits because they're not working together. But by playing tit for tat and knowing that I'll be punished if I choose to cheat my other player or my partner, then we can end up in this don't advertise situation because as long as my partner doesn't cheat me, I won't cheat him, and we'll continue to play that way until the end of the game. But that's the only way that these two players will get out of the Nash equilibrium is if they can cooperate and stick to this idea of tit for tat, in which case they can end up at the cooperative outcome.